Let's get into it. I've got some stuff to share with folks today. Let me bring something up, and just so everybody knows, Joe's right. We spent a bit of time reviewing his book when he's put a ton of work into it. Writing books, by the way, lead to divorce, just to everybody else out there. But you'll notice on my bio slide I stuck up there for you, there's the Agile Kata certified trainer. We won't. This deck isn't about Agile Kata, but we will mention Agile Kata somewhere along the lines, and you'll see why it's relevant. I think Joe's created something great off the back of the work of Mike Rother on Toyota Kata. He's brought in how to use Toyota Kata for improvement, for coaching, alongside some of the Agile techniques that we all know and are familiar with. And given that Agile's in a bit of a crisis now, which I'm going to talk about, and the QR code on screen, you can scan it, take a picture of it, or just do a screenshot. That'll take you to a bunch of stuff that I give away for free if you want to get some more information later on. Takes to my link tree. So let's talk about this state of Agile in 2025. And we all know this business. This business has been around for a while. The certificate selling business, the commoditization of Agile, that business is now over. Thankfully, it's dying. And even though we all offer some form of knowledge accreditation in the work we do, and Agile Kata is no different for Joe, we are now seeing the decline, thankfully, of the certification mills just spewing out endless certificates. And my advice to you is, if you're paying an annual fee for a certificate, please stop. There is no necessity to do that. You have demonstrated your skills in the market. You don't need to keep paying Scaled Agile and others an annual fee. And then the other thing we've discovered, and this is my opinion, you may disagree, but one-size-fits-all frameworks are done, are finished, are over. We've all tried them, and Scaled Agile, the most common one, of course. There are many others. It's not alone in this. We're just every method you could think of thrown at the wall, and basically use everything and everything will work. But that's the emperor's new clothes that people were selling. And the fact is, you can't scale Agile frameworks. And this is the reality, and people may disagree with me. Scaled Agile is a Scaled Agile framework. Here's the problem, is there's no standard approach. The illusion is you have a framework, one size fits all, go out and do it. But the focus, for me at least, is many patterns and techniques. And you'll see with Agile Kata and others I'll talk about later, there are many patterns and techniques, and all are valuable. All methods, tools, techniques, approaches are valuable, but context determines the approach. So if you're in, I don't know, health and hospital care and medical industry, very different than if you're in human resources. Or if you're a machine learning programmer, you are a very different context than if you're in banking and finance or stock market investments or, hey, cryptocurrency. Anybody seen Bitcoin this week? I've been weeping into my tea. So context is the important thing, because no one size fits all. We have very different industries, and context recognizes that no two situations are identical. And when you're in a complex adaptive system, and if you're not sure what one of those is, look in the mirror. The person staring back at you is a complex adaptive system. The basic definition, no centralized control. We are constantly changing and adapting depending on what's happening around us due to our influences and triggers. So you can't use a case-based approach. And a case-based approach is what a lot of consultancies use. They turn up, they give you a chosen framework, the outsource deal is signed with your employers, the company you're working with. Everybody gets certified, of course, great money in certification. We set up the Agile PMO governance, a total oxymoron, and then we give away all our accountability to the vendor. We outsource the systems integrator. That's typically how a case-based approach works. And it worked in the hospital, so it'll definitely work in the bank. And if it worked in the bank, it'll definitely work in the manufacturing company. But as I've just mentioned, one size doesn't fit all. Context is critical, and understanding the granularity of methods is important. And because of my friend Dave Snowden, this is a statement he would make. Complex systems scale by decomposition. So you break everything down to the lowest level that still makes sense. And then you look at recombination of methods and tools to actually get the effect you need. So complex systems do not scale by imitation. You can't copy paste a solution, which is what the Agile industry has been trying to do for a long time. You can't just do it through replication or through case-based approaches. You have to start looking at context and what works at that moment in time in your context with the tools that are available to you. And as we say, we need chefs, not recipes. Great chefs don't follow recipes. They tweak ingredients, they try things out, and they create great flavor and great meals and great food. If anybody's ever been to India or people who have Indian heritage, they'll know that their mothers cook through feel and touch and just experience, not by following a recipe card. That's how you get great curries. So complex adaptive systems need chefs, not recipes. But we've been selling recipes for, I don't know, for years now. That's been the way we've been doing things. So simply, tools have context. So a hammer and a toothbrush, I've used this slide many times in the past, have great utility. They both work really well when used in context, but get it wrong and the results are not as you would expect. And this is because of something called bounded applicability. Again, a phrase that Dave Snowden came up with, but it essentially describes that all tools have value, but all tools have limits, boundaries to their effectiveness. And if you try and use them outside of those boundaries, the effectiveness is less. Just like driving in a screw with a hammer. It works, but it doesn't really look after the wood very well. It's not really that effective. So just because it's working doesn't mean it's effective. And the other thing we've talked about, and you hear lots of people ranting online about agile versus agility. Agility is like gravity. It just exists. And agility is an emergent property of how we act, the way we act and behave, the way we approach work. It's not method specific. You don't need to use this method to get agility. It's about how we approach problems and how we act and collaborate, work together, and how we understand context. Now, I updated this visual. I put it out on LinkedIn the other day and it's had some amusing comments because now when we say recognized experts over time, this is the illusion of knowledge. This is who people choose as their experts. It doesn't mean these are the correct experts. And there's a quote from Einstein there, if you're bothered, but essentially we used to follow philosophers and scientists. And then we started to listen to the PhD boffins coming out of business school. And then we turned ourselves over to Fox News and other media like that. And hey, if you ever want to laugh, just watch Sky News Australia. And then we started listening to the agile coaches, bless you, if you're out there. I was one. And now everybody starts farming TikTok and Instagram and other social media sites as their source and font of information. And our politicians have gravitated to that. TikTok was going to be banned until it was seen as a valuable asset to get the current administration elected. And now, of course, we all believe Grok, because Grok tells us everything. And even Jeff Sutherland's been telling the world that he can now code 30 times faster because of Grok. Go ask Grok what it thinks of that. I got an interesting response today. This is just a bit of fun just to show how our ways of working and our ways of thinking are evolving, and so is the agile industry. Let's get into this continuous improvement thing. A lot of you have heard this word Kaizen, Japanese word that literally translates to change good, or good change if you reverse the ways Japanese read right to left. Oh, so I'm being asked a question just popped up. It's inattentional blindness. I will drop it in the chat so somebody understands that. But if you bear with me, I'll type that in when I finish presenting this little flow of consciousness, but it's attentional with the word IN on the beginning, inattentional blindness, and you can research that. And I'll give Joe a link to the survey, so the research on that, so you can follow that up after the webinar. Kaizen, good change. Here's the China, but when I spoke to my interpreters and the people who I go to, the native language speakers, translators and interpreters who have worked over the years with some of the great leaders in the lean and agile and the lean world from Japan, I asked them what it really meant, and they said it really means make something new, find a new approach. Don't just iterate the existing. Look for alternatives, look for better approaches. And there's some words of wisdom there from the interpreter. You'll get a copy of all these visuals as part of the webinar as well. And then I remember my friend Ritsu Shingo. Shingo-san passed away more than a year ago now, but he'd been a Toyota leader for many years. And we started talking, and he talked about practice versus improvement. And so we've all heard the phrase practice makes perfect, but practice just improves your personal ability with what he called a given condition, the current situation, the current condition. So you can practice and get better at that. But he then said improvement of the given condition is a benefit that makes everybody happy. And the way he summed it up, he says, just getting better at the given condition does not improve the condition. It just improves your personal ability. If you've got a system or a process that sucks, but you work really hard to deal with it, you get better at dealing with it, but it hasn't improved the process or the system or whatever it is you're dealing with. What we want to do is improve the process, the system, the environment, so it benefits everybody versus you just getting better at navigating how bad it sucks. So that's the difference between practice and improvement from one of my great mentors, Ritso Shingo. But the reality of it is we're moving in to much more the digitization of work. Now, a lot of the people listening to this either live or in the future be in the software, the digital workspace, sometimes known as knowledge work, which I find a bit demeaning for people who don't do digital work, because does that mean it isn't knowledge-driven work? Anyway, it's a different conversation. But here's the reality, with most production is now digital. So a friend of mine, John Shook, who's well known in the lean world, said that a lot of manufacturing even now is becoming digital. There's still physical aspects to it, but it's now controlled from the digital perspective. And if we look at the rate of change from 1947, when the transistor was developed, we had a big chunk of time before 1974 when IBM gave the world the PC, probably the biggest mistake they ever made, but it is what it is. And TCP/IP, IP was invented. Before then, there was no TCP/IP addresses, no IP addressing. Then we get a big chunk of time, the iPhone comes along, and then rapidly, if you start to see it, every 5 years, we get DNA editing from CRISPR, we get AI becoming mainstream in 2017, we get ChatGPT LLMs in 2022. But look at the time difference now, just 2 years on, we start to get what's called agentic AI. That's the AI that's making decisions autonomously. So things are moving on really rapidly, and our organizations can no longer organize to those challenges. We can't use the old ways of working, deep hierarchies and deep processes and bureaucratic messes and red tape and lots of meetings about meetings, because the technology is moving too fast. So this thing about agile or being agile or having agility is still alive, but it's not the framework world that everybody thinks it is. So we need to organize our people around this digitization. And a friend of mine, Morton, he said, we need to organize to opportunity. It took hours to make this slide, by the way, but it means that we need an organization that can change dynamically and rapidly, prioritizing our tasks, adjusting our goals and our direction, our vector, if you prefer, where our true north is, and effectively managing our resources, not just people, because people are people, but all our resources to seize those opportunities for growth and success. And we're not going to do that by following a very structured approach. We need some flexibility there. The lunatic's running the asylum, but some flexibility, some enabling constraints so the agents in the system can move freely. And here's a definition that John Shook gave us. The key difference between the physical world and the digital world, and the reason you struggle so much, is that in the physical world, we've got high visibility. You can see the work. You just look with your eyes, you can see it happening. And the variation's low. We're making lots of the same things over and over again. We're not making different things every single day. Whereas in the digital world, we have very low visibility. It's all hidden in computers, in black boxes, in the cloud. We can't see it by just looking. And it's high variation. We want lots of different size user stories, lots of different size backlog. Every piece of work we do is never the same twice. Code doesn't work like that. So that gives us a challenge. And I posted this the other day because people are always raving about how great Tesla are. And Tesla's reinventing the world, and they iterate the product as it goes down the production line. That, I'm afraid, is complete nonsense. It's made up by other people out on the web who want to appear to be influencers. The reality of it is that when you're in product development, research and development, you are iterating rapidly using agile techniques. This is lean startup on the left of this visual. But once you move into scaled production, once you start to scale up, you move more into established manufacturing, because there's all these rules that say you can't change the product while it's being built, safety, compliance, all sorts of other regulatory constraints that even Tesla cannot ignore. Now, somebody asked me the other day, well, Nigel, that's not how software works. Well, when you move out from R&D and rapid development, you're moving into production, you're moving into operations, you need stability. You can't be acting like a startup when you're in production, when you're in operations and support. Yes, you've got more releases being developed in the background and being released, but there is some stability and control. So this whole thing of one size fits all comes into play here. You can't be using Scrum to run operations. It's not the appropriate approach. Scrum's great in rapid iteration, rapid development, not so great when you're doing operations and stabilization and running the system day to day. So let's talk about continuous improvement, the reason we're all here. PDCA, plan, do, check out. Everybody knows that or should know that. If you don't know that, please learn that. It's really important. Let's go back in time to the era of 1620, when this British guy, bless him, wrote this thing called the New Organum, Latin Novum Organum. It was an update to work by Galileo 20 or so years previously, and this is where empiricism was born. Not Scrum didn't invent empiricism, I'm sorry to tell you that, and Ken will tell you the same. This was developed as the modern scientific method. If you've been to university, you've done a hypothesis and an experiment and reached a conclusion, you've used this approach, this is called empiricism. It's the modern scientific method, otherwise known as inductive reasoning. There are two other types of reasoning you can read up on your own, deductive and abductive. Now, if we do a little bit of a history lesson real fast here, Galileo goes and comes up with modern science in many moons ago. Look here, 1500s through to the 1600s. That was the time he was on the planet. 1620, Bacon comes up with empiricism. Fast forward years later, and this guy, Walter Shewhart, the father of statistical quality control, so any Six Sigma people out there, he's the reason you've got statistical quality control, not Motorola. I'm sorry to burst that bubble for you. And then you've got Homer Sorensen, probably don't know who the heck he is, but in 1946, at the cessation of hostilities in Japan after World War II, he gets called out by MacArthur under the MacArthur Plan to rebuild the telecommunications infrastructure in Japan. He worked for, I think, Bell, AT&T or Bell South, one of those companies now, Bell Systems as it was. Ishikawa, his son is more famous to most of you. His son invented the fishbone diagram. This was the father, Ishikawa-san. He starts the Japanese Union of Scientists and Engineers in 1946, working with Homer Sorensen. A couple of years later, a friend of his, Charlie Pratzman, pops along, and together they decide they need to teach the Japanese quality because the way they're finding factories and the way work is being done at that period was very poor, so they decided to teach quality methods. Edwards Deming, who was out there at the time doing some statistical surveying, was asked to take over the lectures that Sorensen and Pratzman had put together with Juicy for Japanese business because Shewhart, who was their first choice, had pneumonia and couldn't return to Japan. Deming should be famous to all of you, 14 points and all that. And then they discover in recent years, and there's work now going on to write a paper and a new book on this, that the origins of PDCA actually originated from this original course taught to the Japanese. This is the basis of all quality. Now, PDSA is what Deming coined in the 1980s as his reflection on this when he wrote a book called Out of the Crisis. Bit of a history lesson for you there. What do we mean by all this? Let's stick some words on we might understand. Let's try and overlay empiricism and PDCA here. Plan is form a hypothesis. You've got an idea. You've got to come up with a plan to executing that. So we'll do the experiment. This sounds very Scrum-like. Then we'll check and reflect on what we've done. We've done some work. We're going to reflect on that. We're going to learn from it. And then we're going to decide what to do next. So you could, and I've got a slide which overlays this on for you, but this is point number 5 that Jeff Leica wrote, in the Toyota Way book, building a culture of stopping to fix problems to get quality right the first time. And that's all the way back to the quality movement in Japan, all the way through the Toyota lineage, through to what Jeff wrote in the Toyota Way book, and overlaying some of our agile things. And get the facts were the first 3 words I ever learned in Toyota, genuinely. Now, let's lay that on problem solving. So Toyota's famous for its problem solving approach. So in planning, we clarify and break down the problem and set a target. In do, we implement the plan. In check, we evaluate the results. And in act, we decide what to do next. We standardize our success and we share across the organization. A very rapid dive into problem solving. Let's look at design thinking. So we observe, we ideate based on our observations. We start with observations, we ideate. We'll prototype, we'll come up with an idea for the problem we're trying to solve or improve the situation, and we'll test it. And guess what? We'll repeat it because we'll observe the results of the test. So plan, do, check, act. Of course, with design thinking, the empathy is part of that process with the people we're striving to support and to help. Let's stick Scrum in there. So Scrum, plan, do, check, act. So in plan, we do sprint planning and backlog refinement. That's normal. Of course, the do is the sprint. Then in our check, we have two types of checking. We have our daily scrum, which is to check and adjust the plan. That's the whole point of the daily scrum. It's a planning activity. Then we'll do sprint review to check the results of the sprint and to talk about that. Then we'll act. We'll do a retrospective and say, this is how we work. This is what we learned. How are we going to adjust? How are we going to improve going forward? So it's again a continuous improvement cycle. Let's look at lean teaching here. This is from the Lean Institute. So we start by getting the direction or challenge, which is setting what some people call true north. I'll get into what complexity folks call it in a minute. Then once we've done that, we've set the direction, we'll grasp the current situation. Where are we now? We know where we want to go, but where are we now? Then we'll conduct experiments. We'll first of all establish what the next step is. This is the most important thing. So we know where we are, but we can't get directly to true north in one hop. So what's the next target condition? Now we'll experiment to get there. Let's introduce you to Toyota Kata. Look at me, it looks almost the same. Because guess what? Jeff Leiker, Mike Rother, the Lean Institute, all very good friends. John Shook, all these people know each other over the years. And this is Mike Rother's version of Toyota Kata. It looks exactly the same to me. I don't really need to repeat that. Although he just call out the threshold of knowledge here because we're in the current condition. This is all we currently know. So we have to say, what is the next logical step? If you're a Scrum person, what does the next sprint look like? The next experiment, the next iteration. If you're a Kanban person, it doesn't matter. You're still looking what the next step is, the next iteration, the next period of time before you reevaluate where you're going. In Kanban, it may be continuous flow, but we're not going from zero to hero in one step. There are iterations, or should be, if you're doing it properly. Now, let's get something that Joe might be familiar with. Let's look at Agile Kata. So, Joe's taken the work of Mike Rother and he's looked at how we do continuous improvement as a team, how we improve our coaching stance, how we improve as coaches supporting teams, and he's applied that to Agile. Because guess what? Agile's all been about big frameworks. And what Joe's realized, that isn't what it's about. It's about how do we work together? How do we experiment? How do we support each other? How do we find the right tools and approaches to become more agile? Becoming agile isn't about using Scrum or Kanban or SAFe or anything else out there. Although all of those things have aspects that may be valuable in your context. So look at, I played with Joe's image a little bit and he knew I did this. But look, understand the directional challenge. This is this true north. This is where we're heading today. Where we want to head, should I say. Where are we currently? Grasp, navigate, wayfind, as a friend of mine, Sonia, calls it, wayfinding. Where are we now? And where do we think we want to get to next? And now we use PDCA approaches to do all the experiments. It's exactly what Mike built into Toyota Kata, exactly what Joe's built into Agile Kata. So let's look at something the complexity folks call the vector theory of change. Now, I doubt Dave Snowden will ever watch this, but if he does, Dave, I'm sorry for the statement I'm going to make now. But this is PDCA using different words. He'll kill me for ever saying that, and he'll send me to all the pits of complexity hell. But basically, complex environments are dynamic in nature. And I see a question about complex adaptive systems I will come back to. Cause and effect relationships can only be deduced in retrospect. You can't predict cause and effect in a complex adaptive system. What you can do is look once it's occurred and then examine those cause and effect relationships. So that's what it means about deduced in retrospect. So we start from where you are. This is straight out of the complexity playbook. Start from where you are, map the current dispositional state of the culture, so all the things that are happening, and look for patterns. So we're doing pattern detection. Set a vector, a direction to move in. Hey, that sounds a bit like true north, but this is where we think we want to head right now. What do we amplify? What do we increase? We want more of this. What do we dampen? We want less of that. More like this, less like that is a phrase you'll hear Dave say a lot. Look for the adjacent possibles. I'll show you that on another visual in a minute. What's the first stepping stone we can take? Oh, guess what? The first experiment, the next target condition. Design interventions or nudges in order to encourage behavioral change. So what are the experiments we're going to do that we can execute, which may nudge our system that we're trying to improve in the right direction towards that vector that we've set? Run multiple parallel safe to fail experiments. Guess what they are? Lots of PDCAs, lots of hypothesis testing. That's exactly what that refers to. And then continuously monitoring to determine any shift in direction and landscape, etc. Looking for weak signals, looking for the outliers, the things that inattentional blindness that only the 17% see. We need to get the other 83% seeing what the 17% seeing. Now, this is your adjacent possibles. We've got where we are now in the present, our future's over here, which is where we want to head to, our true north. We need to look in our peripheral vision, and that's a metaphor for looking around the system. But what's adjacent? What's possible that's in our adjacent peripheral vision here? So, and Dave calls that side casting. But then you can also backcast. Look from where you've come from. Look what happened last sprint. Oh, that might be called the retrospective or whatever your iteration was. Look back a few iterations and reconsider that in light of where you are now and the direction you're heading in, and think about what you might be missing. Now, I poured a bunch of these together a couple of years ago. I was actually doing some work in a real physical factory that produces frozen food for consumption through Kroger, Whole Foods, and various other things. And I went into the plant and I thought, and I'm talking to all the people who do really difficult, hard physical work. We always pay the people who do the hardest work the lowest amount of money, just as a general observation. And so, and a lot of these people didn't speak fluent English. They're either Latin American speaking, Native American. And I asked them, I just put up a board, this top right corner, I stuck up a whiteboard, 8 foot by 4 foot on the plant floor and said, give me your suggestions for improvement. But then what happened was it became so popular, I started to look at how could I improve it. The board at the bottom is an iteration. I kept iterating this. The large graphic on the left is just my making it easier for you to read. But I basically combined a bit of Scrum, a bit of Kanban, a bit of lean thinking here, and created a system that allowed them to make suggestions that could then be put in a backlog once they've been cleaned up, that could be triaged, prioritized, executed on a weekly plan with escalation points for things like feedback or HR if it was beyond the scope of the people on the plant floor. We gave them a daily meeting with an area where they could put things that needed further discussion, like a parking lot, as it shows on the board. This was basically, I was breaking down different methods and approaches, this is a simple example, bringing them together in a new context that gave rise to an emergence, something greater than the sum of the parts. And this is what I'm trying to say. In your context, you can look at the bits that might make sense, how to combine them and use them within that given context. And this is when we get into application and reflection. We're doing for time, Joe. We're all right. I'll be done in about 5 minutes, so we're good. So we've got the empirical process where I started a bit of this ramble. On the right, you've got the sort of lean view of that plan, do, check, act. But the idea is here, you must continuously experiment, trying a range or a multitude, as I said, different tools, techniques, methods, approaches. Break them down, take elements and aspects of them, combine, test different combinations and recombinations, and to look at which interactions are working, the reactions and interactions that give you the desired outcomes. There's no template for this. Now, I have a little bit about measuring improvement. I'll give a shout out for the flow system, which now they are registered trademarks. When I set out to develop this, and there's, of course, there's a couple of books out there. There's a free guide. If you follow that QR code from the beginning, or go back to the recording and go back to the beginning of it, scan the QR code. We've given you a whole bunch of worksheets and material you can download free of charge, which are all extracts from the playbook, which itself is over 700 pages of work, a lot of visuals, lots of stuff in there. But the whole concept of this was these areas are all important. Lean thinking, our foundation, my years in Toyota, is deeply important. Then we've got complexity stuff, the stuff out of Dave Snowden's head and all the work he and colleagues have done in complex adaptive systems. You all know leadership because we talk about it all the time, but Amy Edmondson's work based on earlier work from the 1960s on psych safety and a whole bunch of other things like Dave Marquet's leader's intent or commander's intent, as he'd call it. Then the area of team science, which isn't going out to escape the mummy's curse. That isn't teamwork training and team building. You need to do that in the context of the work you're doing. And how these things come together, the concept of the triple helix of flow. So this is what led to the development of this, which is basically a culmination of a lot of the things I presented here, understanding there is no easy one-size-fits-all to this.